Hello, it's John here from Alpine Backcountry Rental in Tomamu, Hokkaido, Japan. And today I want to show you how we set up our Fritschi tech bindings. Now in rental we have two different Fritschi bindings. We have the Fritschi Tecton and the Fritschi Evo. And a lot of our bindings are on the new Fritschi rental plate, which adjusts both front and back and gives you boot centre, gives you accurate boot centre. And a lot of them are also on the previous rental plate, which really doesn't require any more than a boot sole length adjustment with the rear adjustment screw. Now the same applies whether it's on the new rental plate or the old rental plate. The boot length adjustment is simply that rear screw, so it's the same on both. Now today we're going to use one of our Scott Cosmo touring boots to set up these bindings. Now the first thing I need to know is not the size of the boot, which is 27.5, but it's the boot sole length, the BSL, which is always printed somewhere around the base of the boot, and on this particular boot it's printed just here. So that's 306mm boot sole length. So before we adjust the rear forward pressure screw on this new rental plate, I need to adjust the front part of the binding and the rear part of the binding to close proximity to that 306. And there's increments written on the rental plate, and we now have to adjust both the front and the rear. So what we do, we lift that lever up and push it in, and then we can move this front part of the binding backwards and forwards. And the closest one here to 306 is 322 to 298. And we do the same with the back. So with the rear one we also have the same lever, and we've got to push it in, and then we can move that part of the binding backwards and forwards. And we go to the increment that says 298, 322, lock it down. Okay, so now we've got the front and rear plate close to our boot sole length. We need to do our final adjustment with that rear pressure screw. So we put the boot in the binding just like all tech bindings. Push down at the front, make sure it's in, eyeball the back, it's pretty close already. Push it in. And I've just got a little bit of a gap in there, just in there, and I want that gap to be no more than about 1 millimetre. So what I'm going to do is screw the rear part of the binding in till it touches, and I can eyeball that there and I can see it's touching, and I just come back a fraction, and there we go, we've got about 1 millimetre in there, and that's exactly what I want. Now that I've got that and eyeballed it nice and close, what I do is always take it out and double check, pull it out, put it back into the binding, eyeball it, very good, it's about 1 millimetre. Okay, so that's it, very simple. Now the next thing we want to do is do the din setting. Now the beauty of the Fritschi binding, it's got both a front and a back din, and they're very easy to set. Come out of the binding, check at the front. Now I'm just going to put an arbitrary one in here, I'll just make that 8. And I'll do the same at the back, lift up the heel risers so that I can see the readout, and just put that to 8. Now my din's set. Now what I want to do is show you how to go into walk mode, and also show you some of the do's and don'ts of this particular binding in order to look after it. So to go into walk mode, we press this lever here at the back, easiest to use your thumb, press it down, right down, and the rear turret comes back a bit. Then what we want to do is lock out the brake, and that's ready to step in as a touring binding or in hiking mode. So we jump back into the binding, lined up properly, and as you can see we can now hike with the binding. Now in order to go into steeper terrain we want to use our heel lifters, and obviously you can use the back of your ski pole to put them up. You've got two, you've got the first one and the second one, and as ever they take the pressure off your Achilles tendon, off your calf muscle, and give better positive tension to your climbing skin so that you can climb more efficiently. Now one of the things that's a slight problem with this binding, or can be if you're not careful, is that we put these heel risers back for the moment. We're going to get out of the binding and we're going to go back into ski mode just by lifting that up, and we're back in ski mode. Now it's very important to remember that these have got to be in the up position. It's quite easy to forget, and if you try to step in with them there, obviously you're going to break them off. So just a word of caution there. The other word of caution on this particular binding is the white plastic marker at the front. And one of the dangers on this binding, and in fact all bindings, is damaging the front part of the binding by trying to kick ice off the bottom of your boot. Now you shouldn't do that on any binding, but on this particular binding, if you do that, this piece of white plastic here can be broken off, so really important to be very gentle. And if you want to get ice off, you can quite often just get it off on the side of the ski instead of bashing it against the top of the binding. And the other thing that we have to do in hiking mode, of course, is to lock the front of the binding. And obviously we do that in case we're doing kick turns and we don't want the binding to pop off, which it can do. Now this binding comes with written instructions. It's a little bit idiot proof. So on the front part of the binding it actually says, step in, ski and walk. Okay, so that's the Fritschi Evo. Pretty simple, very good binding. Let's have a look at the Tecton. Now the only difference with the Tecton is the rear heel part of the binding. The front of the binding is exactly the same. On this particular binding I've got also one of the new rental plates. We've already showed you how to do that, so we won't worry about that. I've already preset this one to this particular boot. What I want to do though is show you how the rear turret works, because that is the main difference between these two bindings. So first of all, we've got 3 positions for this rear turret. So that's step in when it's parallel to the ground. So let's have a look at that. Now I've already adjusted this to the boot. So step in like a normal Tec binding. Make sure it's in. And step in. And you're in like a normal ski binding. And that's the position that comes up to that middle position. To step out, you can press both levers down and easily step out. Now for example, if you're on the resort doing a couple of runs, then that's the way to do it, so you're ready to step back into ski. Now if we want to go into hiking mode with this particular binding, we push this up. So it's in the vertical position, pointing straight up. And what that's done is brought this back, then we press down on the brakes, lock out the brakes, and we're ready to step in and use it as a climbing binding. So stepping in again, make sure it's in properly, and we're ready to hike. And like the Evo, we've got 2 different levels for climbing. So we've got the first one and we've got the second one. And of course the other thing is we lock it at the front, and let me just add, as ever, never ski with it in the lock position. And again, the beauty of the Fritschi design, they've idiot proofed it. It says walk, so if it just says walk, don't ski. If it says ski, you can ski. Now similar to the Evo, we've got to make sure that when we do step in, just a word of caution, that our climbing levers are not in the down position. Now sometimes you can step into this binding accidentally thinking you're in the ski position. So always make sure that you've pushed that right back, and that'll keep the climbing levers out of the way. So that's the only word of caution with this particular binding. So just the last thing that I want to show you is the other rental plate setup that we have. We have quite a few bindings on this previous model of the rental plate, and it really is just a lengthened rear adjustment plate. Different to say a personal one, which is quite narrow, so it gives you a lot more adjustment for boot sole length. And it's a little bit lighter, so it's what I ski on. And the adjustment for this is exactly the same. It's really just the rear pressure screw and of course your 2 DIN settings. So that's the Fritschi bindings.